I've always been a sucker for video games, ever since I was a kid. He explained that while hospitalized, gaming was the only way for him to kill time. As Sora asked if he was okay, Jaha cradled the small bird and wished it hadn't come to this. He cursed the game's terrible AI, sighing that everything in life eventually gets boring. Finally, he declared that he quit and tossed the console down. Regardless of the genre, he just wasn't having fun with video games anymore. He read forum posts agreeing that every game was the same, with no originality or real depth. That was when he discovered the game, just as he wished for something special to play. He wondered what kind of game he was even looking at. It was Dungeon & Stone, a rare indie RPG with retro 2D pixel art graphics. He realized the game was only in English and began to doubt he would even enjoy it. He figured he might as well give it a shot since the game was free. He realized he had to choose one of the characters on screen. He told himself the choice didn't matter, since he wouldn't be playing for long anyway. After the game offered him a knight companion, he finally understood his purpose. Completely engrossed in the game, he was shocked to discover it was already 10 p.m. He exclaimed that this game was an absolute hidden gem. The game set itself apart by making support characters crucial for advancing. Whenever his character died, he had to start all over from scratch. He started playing for fun, but screamed in frustration as a nurse told him to lower his voice. The brown-haired man quickly apologized for being so loud. He realized he was now fully immersed, refusing to give up after coming so far. He saw the game had no walkthroughs online, resigning himself to the challenge. He remembered vowing in the hospital to beat this game alone, even if it took a lifetime. He remembered serving as a social service agent for his mandatory military duty. He recalled that Dungeon & Stone was the only game he played through college, graduation, and his new job. His character died, but he cursed and immediately decided to go again. Again and again he died, restarting the game for 9 straight years. The confident young man gulped, knowing he had finally made it. His eyes glowing, he screamed that this was the dungeon of the final boss. He now faced the ominous gate of the abyss. The young man threw his arms up, boasting he was the first player to ever make it this far. The brown-haired man wept, saying he spent his entire 20s just trying to reach this part. He affirmed that of course he would enter the final boss's dungeon. A final prompt warned him that once he entered, he could never return. He said he understood the game was just trying to scare him for its final chapter. The system confirmed his choice with a click and told him to wait. His goal for the first attempt was simply to learn the boss's attack patterns. That was why, when a sudden ding sounded, the brown-haired man asked if the loading was finally done. Then a message announced the tutorial was cleared. He had now set foot in the abyss. Stunned, he wondered aloud how that could have only been the tutorial. Confused, he demanded to know why the text was in Korean when the game only supported English. He raged that he'd wasted so much time translating it word by word. He cried out in shock as his monitors flashed, confirming a new target. With a flash of intense light, he cried out in agony. He could only wonder what was happening as the system began its transmission process. Then, he simply lost consciousness. A booming voice congratulated the young warriors, announcing they were leaving the sanctified grounds. He woke to an armored figure telling the roaring crowd their journey to become true warriors had begun. A blinding flash of light consumed everything. He was completely lost for words. A bearded man's command to choose a weapon echoed through the eerily familiar scene. He questioned what weapon they were talking about and demanded to know where he was. He forced himself to stop and think clearly. He considered his first move, treating this like the prologue to a difficult game. He resolved to quickly figure out what was happening and gather information. He found his body was in perfect shape, until a sudden thought stopped him. He realized his hands were now bigger and more muscular, yet he controlled them perfectly. He clenched his fists and announced that this new body was his. He questioned if this was truly his body when a voice commanded anyone called to approach the altar. As the dark-haired warrior reacted in alarm, a voice commanded Carrick to step forward. Then, A violent tremor shook the ground where two imposing warriors stood. In that moment, a gloved hand seized a glowing staff. The blonde warrior praised the excellent choice as his companion lifted a two-handed battle axe. A scarred elder announced Carrick's journey was starting and commanded Aina to step forward. Suddenly, a brown-haired man realized he had seen this before. As young warriors chose their weapons, an overseer praised a blonde woman's sword and a dark-haired man's spear. They were finally being recognized as warriors worthy of the journey. Then, a tattooed warrior began his ominous proclamation. He proclaimed that the glory of Rafdonia lay on one young warrior's path. Suddenly, the young warrior knew with absolute certainty what this place was. A character selection screen for Dungeon and Stone appeared, highlighting the Barbarian. He realized this was how the game began when he chose the Barbarian. As the Barbarian, he was just about to enter the dungeon of the final boss. Others shouted in utter confusion, saying that none of this was possible. A red-haired man screamed that this was how Dungeon and Stone began. Terrified, the red-haired man couldn't understand why he was there. A brown-haired man saw he was unlike the other barbarians. Realizing he wasn't alone, he furiously demanded to know who had spoken without permission. With eyes glowing red, the giant warrior loomed over the speaker. Then, an enraged man with light hair turned on Loom, asking how the intruder got there. A muscular man roared in furious denial. A furious man with brown hair insisted it was all someone's fault. Then, a red-haired man could only gasp in confusion. Finally, a white-haired warrior loomed forward, certain it had to be him. The red-haired man asked in disbelief if he meant Dungeon and Stone. The white-haired warrior cut his question short with a devastating slice. A spray of blood burst from the tattooed man's chest. He wondered what was happening as he tried to calm himself. He knew showing weakness now meant he would die just like him. Then, it was revealed that an evil spirit had possessed Orium, the son of Kadua. Even as a dark-haired warrior grabbed him, the elder told the young warriors to ignore the evil spirit. As an unseen voice ordered the ceremony to resume, the tattooed man suddenly understood. He realized the first rule: anyone from outside the game was simply an evil spirit. He then voiced the second rule, warning that they would die if anyone found out. He concluded that he must see the ceremony through without being discovered. Then, an armored commander announced a problem before calling on Serum, the fourth son of Kennick. A brown-haired man flinched, unable to get a word out. Then, two masked figures stepped forward, both calling for the next participant. A voice declared that they had no idea what their own name was. A muscular, tattooed man furiously demanded the game at least tell him his own name. A dark-clothed figure accepted this was their only chance as the next person was called. The dark-clothed figure clenched their fist, ready to risk answering to another's name. A scarred, white-haired man furiously called for Bjorn, son of Yondel, to step forward. A blooded, tattooed man knew he had only 1 second left. A muscular brown-haired woman declared they had 2 seconds remaining. The armored figure with long blonde hair announced that they had only 2 seconds to take the first step. A figure in sandals took the first step onto the cracked earth. A muscular man asserted that it had to be his name. But he could only hope that was the case. Then, a voice commanded Bjorn, son of Yondel, to step forward. A large man with light hair loomed over the defiant, blooded Bjorn. Through the smoke, an elder with a white beard glared with glowing eyes. Bjorn steeled himself against the fiery glare. A bearded warrior ordered him to choose a weapon, just as he had predicted. He proudly declared his name was Bjorn, son of Yondel. He clenched his fist, preparing to make another important decision. He explained that he built his barbarian for melee because they had physicality instead of magic. He announced that he knew exactly which item to select. Suddenly, a scarred old warrior whipped his head around. A voice declared that with the shield, Bjorn had taken his first step toward becoming a warrior. A system message announced the synchronization was complete. Then, a monitor chimed in a dark, empty room. A message confirmed his item level had increased, with his data logged for an administrator. A system notification detailed Bjorn Yondel's updated stats and combat power. He recalled starting the game with a greatsword, but its poor defense meant his barbarian just died over and over again. The build was unreliable, forcing him to risk his character's life in every single battle. Then one day, a thought came to the heavily muscled man as he looked at a weapon stall. He questioned using a barbarian for damage, since the class has the vitality and strength of a tank. Confident in his analysis, the dark-haired man resolved to try reworking the barbarian's battle tactics. His experiment began with a massive orange explosion. A barbarian now faced a massive, blooded monster in the smoky arena. An effective smash knocked down the cockatrice, clearing the fight for the barbarian. He considered this the most logical decision based on his knowledge of the game. He declared he had no regrets. A thunderous voice demanded the gate open, and it began to rumble. Then, a single deafening thud slammed against the fortified gate. The voice announced that after the ceremony, all barbarians must enter the labyrinth. To do that, however, they must first set foot inside the city. A voice then commanded the warriors to embark on their journey into Rafdonia. A grey-haired man then roared that their destiny led them to that very place. The army immediately stormed forward, led by a brown-haired man. A blond man yelled that he was running simply because they were. Someone cried out in alarm, asking if the group even knew where they were going. Suddenly, a single sharp command ordered them all to halt. A muscular man with dark hair exclaimed that he was lost, calling the entire situation shameless. Then the crowd turned on Carrick, blaming him for leading them astray. Held back by a blonde woman, Carrick finally declared he would no longer lead from the front. Then Aina declared she would lead from the front, earning the crowd's immediate support. Elsewhere, a long-haired man with golden eyes watched with a subtle, knowing smirk. The long-haired man with golden eyes considered the name Aina, then admitted he was lost. Suddenly, his expression twisted in horrified recognition. He shouted in disbelief, asking if the other was the same. They screamed that they had to reach the labyrinth before it was too late. One man shouted that their leader should be Jin of Tet Ran, not Aina. A muscular man with blue hair worried he'd have to step in to reach the labyrinth. A person in a brown sleeve tapped a light-haired person's shoulder to get their attention. The muscular man with blue hair announced he was Bjorn, as the woman with blonde braids asked if he would blame her. The dark-haired man whispered that he would explain how to navigate. The blonde-haired woman demanded to know how what he said could possibly be true. He told him to just follow the group of people ahead. His companions called the armored men barbaric, but their gear revealed they could only be going to one place. Now that the blonde woman understood, the dark-haired man agreed he would try. As the crowd hailed Aina's discovery of the labyrinth, the dark-haired man was convinced they had no brains. With a sudden flash, a voice cried out that it was the labyrinth. The crowd cried out that they could see the sacred ground of battle. Stunned, a muscular individual confirmed he was really inside the labyrinth. But a purple-haired man had second thoughts about entering the labyrinth for real. He thought he could probably flee right now without anyone noticing. A frail young man recalled being too sick to ever throw a single punch. He doubted his ability to kill the monster and sought another way to pay the tax. All he could do was curse the oppressive tax system. All citizens of Rafdonia must pay taxes at age 20 or be sentenced to death. There were several ways to earn money in the game, starting with the most popular. The first method involved entering the labyrinth to hunt its vicious monsters. The second method was to find work at an establishment like a city pub. The purple-haired warrior stated that he was the problem. A woman with glowing eyes shouted that they don't hire uncivilized barbarians. He realized that if this world's rules were different, he wouldn't have to fight. An announcement declared the gate closes in 10 minutes as a wave of purple energy suddenly erupted. He worried that if he failed to enter the gate, he would be stranded jobless for a month. He knew this was his only chance to enter, but his feet felt frozen to the ground. He realized this was no longer a game, but his real life on the line. A voice called out to Bjorn, son of Yondel, as a hand on his arm made him flinch. He looked up in shock, identifying her as Aina, third daughter of Fenelon. A white-haired woman warned the second daughter they were the only ones left and had to hurry. An announcement boomed that only 5 minutes remained before the gate closed. Then, a violent burst of purple energy erupted, revealing a mysterious hooded figure within. The two warriors watched as the portal visibly shrank with each passing second. The dark-haired man told the blonde woman to go first, promising to be right behind her. A smirking long-haired man called out to Bjorn, thanking the son of Yondel for his advice. But Bjorn simply said there was no need for thanks. A white-haired woman asked the man for wisdom, but he instead praised her own intelligence. A brown-haired man said their brain power was 0, telling them they needed to be reborn. He instructed them to always think first before they move. She thanked him for the advice, promising to repay him if she returned alive from the labyrinth. The dark-haired man wondered if she'd return alive before asking Aina if he was also afraid of death. The blonde woman confirmed that she was also afraid of death. The blonde warrior woman declared that a warrior dies if they cannot fight, asking if it wasn't the same for him. A purple light flared in his eye as the dark-haired man confirmed that it was. He realized they felt the same fear and were only fighting because they had no choice. The only way to survive in this city was to hunt monsters in the labyrinth. Perhaps this was why the barbarians learned to contain their fears, as a voice hoped to see Bjorn alive. A muscular barbarian dashed forward, shouting he was one of them with only a minute before the gate closed. Though he confessed his fear, the muscular man continued to charge forward. As the labyrinth gate prepared to close, the robed figure knew he had to act now. He ignored the warning to step back, knowing his barbarian physique and deep knowledge would be enough to succeed. Engulfed in purple energy, the muscular man roared that he had to survive here. Then, a system window announced his arrival in the crystal cave on the first floor. His gaze locked onto a target with unwavering focus. He looked around the unfamiliar darkness, wondering where he had been sent. A muscular man declared he was an expert on dungeons and stone. The dark-haired man insisted his conclusion was based on his expertise. He had thought his barbarian strength and game knowledge would guarantee survival. Frustrated, the muscular man turned and grumbled that he couldn't see a thing. The blonde woman realized she wasn't the only one who entered the labyrinth with a single item. Then a voice echoed from the darkness, offering its knowledge. A notification appeared, identifying the monster before him as a cockatrice. A muscular man with tattoos groaned, realizing the crystals were why he hadn't needed a torch. A voice suddenly wondered if this labyrinth was a dark area. The outermost sections on the first floor were completely dark and shrouded in shadows. He reasoned that unlike the game, his starting location here could be completely random. First, he called for his status window. But no matter what menu he requested, the system remained unnervingly silent. He admitted with a curse that nothing was working, though he hadn't really expected it to. He decided to just move forward in one direction, tapping the rocky wall. He raised his shield and took a single, cautious step onto the stone. He considered crawling to move faster but knew he had to be cautious of unknown dangers. His face twisted in pure frustration under an intense red glow. A scream tore from the muscular man's throat as he finally collapsed. He realized in horror that he had just stumbled into a goblin trap. A notification confirmed he had triggered a goblin trap. The red-haired man bit his hand, fighting to keep something suppressed. He desperately told himself he could not raise his voice. He realized a goblin must be watching him from somewhere nearby. The only sound was his own heart, pounding in his ears. Sweat poured down his face from the immense strain. He wondered if maybe he was wrong. He refused to believe it was just luck, deciding not to risk it. If he couldn't be certain, he had to account for the worst-case scenario. He reasoned that the trap meant a goblin had heard his cry. He guessed the creature had spotted him, seeing only injured prey. Worse, the creature was patiently waiting for the pain to finally claim him. The tattooed man understood his deafness was the problem and knew what he must do first. The trap was laced with paralysis poison, and he cursed the barbarians for his flimsy sandals. He realized the fight was inevitable and decided he had to strike first. He shouted for his enemy to appear, announcing the poison had finally numbed his foot. He dragged his paralyzed foot, demanding to know why the fool refused to respond. He roared for the little scumbag to finally show his face. He considered that perhaps he was just imagining the goblin hiding nearby. But he decided to limp on, even if it made him look foolish. Fine then, he panted that he would just leave on his own. He would rather be a living fool than a dead scholar. A figure in sandals dragged him across the ground, taunting him about his mother. As his accuser called his family goblins, he struggled with dizziness from the bleeding. As the giant green creature loomed over him, the injured man screamed for it to stop. But then, a single footstep drew his attention. Then, a voice cried out that it had to be the goblin. The muscular man scoffed at the goblin's family bonds, realizing a sound behind him meant he was being followed. Since he still couldn't see, the spiky-haired man considered pretending to run away. Then, a slow, dragging limp echoed from somewhere in the darkness. A barefoot figure stepped carefully out of the shadows. A warrior's powerful swing sent a goblin careening down a blood-splattered wall. The brown-haired man realized the beast was shadowing him, stopping whenever he stopped. He believed the monster was enjoying his terror, patiently waiting for him to die. Realizing the beast was no longer being discreet, the warrior changed plans and lurched forward. A heavily tattooed man tumbled violently to the ground with a cry of pain. The dark-haired man declared that their prey had collapsed right on cue. A goblin-like creature growled from the darkness and brandished its bloody axe. Someone yelled that their chance was now, but the creature responded with a wary snarl. Suddenly, a rock struck the brown-haired man in the back of the head. As more rocks bounced off his chest, the muscular man realized they were just checking if he was dead. A voice suddenly cried out that he was coming. Then, from the darkness, came the sound of approaching footsteps. A goblin with an axe stepped out of the darkness, growling at the fallen man. Then, a dark hand pinned the man down as the goblin shrieked at his terrifying glare. A muscular, tattooed man charged in, roaring that he had been waiting. Enraged, he cursed the creature as he swung his luminous blade. As the monster roared, the tattooed man shouted in shock that he had missed. Someone yelled out as a hand suddenly flared with red power. He cried out as his glowing hand lunged forward against his will. As his hand struck, he realized he could predict the goblin's every move. He lunged forward and roared that he was superior. He was no longer in the body of someone who spent his life hospitalized. A blast of red energy shot forward as the goblin screamed he was a pipsqueak. He realized with a sudden jolt that he was in a barbarian warrior's body. He screamed while exchanging a flurry of brutal, close-quarters blows. Blood splattered as he landed another bone-shattering punch. His glowing fist struck again in an explosion of power. The devastating strike sent the fanged beast flying backward. Heavy, exhausted panting cut through the silence. The blooded muscular man raised his arms to bring them crashing down. He slammed his fists down, shattering the beast into a cloud of particles. The impact sent a spray of red across the pristine white snow. A notification confirmed he defeated the goblin and gained 1 experience point. Panting, the tattooed warrior delivered a final, devastating blow to the creature. Gasping for air, the brown-haired man realized the corpse was already starting to disappear. He thought that it was just like in the game. He recognized the glowing red gem the moment it dropped from the creature. A voice confirmed the gem was currency from the Dungeon and Stone universe. Gasping for breath, he considered what he could buy with the Tier 9 mana stone. A voice offered 1 piece of bread in exchange for the stone. In response, a blood-splattered man simply chuckled. All that struggle was for nothing more than this. A voice confirmed the heavily tattooed man should fall from the wall. Then, a presence announced its arrival in the world. It revealed a world where monsters roamed a labyrinth, leaving only dust and loot behind when slain. Outside the labyrinth, he saw different races coexisting in the world he knew only from a game. He was now certain he was truly inside the game's universe. However, His legs finally buckled under the weight of his injuries. He promised himself he would never confuse this world with a game. He stumbled forward, leaving a trail of blood in the dark passage. Then, something began dragging him away as a notification confirmed he was bleeding out. His blood smeared across the wall in a single red streak. A system window warned him he was taking damage from bleeding. Heaving for breath, the dark-haired warrior dragged himself across the bloody ground. He continued bleeding out, feeling like a severely injured dog that had been abandoned. Though it cost him his pride, crawling was faster and protected his injured right foot. Best of all, he no longer had to worry about stepping on another trap. He resolved to endure the pain of another trap if it meant a chance at survival. A notification warned that he was taking damage because the bleeding refused to stop. Knowing this was bad, he dragged himself onward to find someone to help. He reasoned that he could escape the dark area by moving in a single direction. He wondered if the man beheaded at the ceremony had died for good or just returned to the real world. Bleeding continuously, he thought he could now understand why people have faith. A critical warning announced his health was below 5% and he could die without treatment. Facing death, he fell into complete despair. Yet he continued to climb, dragging his bleeding body up the sheer rock wall. He knew he was right when the darkness finally began to fade. He knew he had to reach that light before he could think of what to do next. A muscular victor stepped on the wounded man's face, mocking his foolish hope for help. The man with purple eyes asked who would help a dying barbarian with nothing to offer. He realized he must have lost a lot of blood. The dark-haired man sarcastically asked what else he was supposed to do besides wait for death. He figured he had to be hallucinating. Dragging himself forward, the dark-haired man figured he would find a monster before another person. He wondered if he had seen an alter ego, realizing he was finally losing his mind. He screamed through the pain, determined to survive at all costs. As a voice promised his death, he screamed for anyone to intervene. A voice taunted him, asking why he wouldn't just give up and die already. He roared back, refusing to ever give up. Then a voice cried out with joy that light had finally returned. Suddenly, a sister message warned that his health had reached below 4%. He struggled for each breath, refusing to stop. But he could go no further, begging for anyone to help. The armored man cried out as he and his companions plummeted into a crystal cavern. Then, a purple-haired adventurer spotted a dying barbarian and called out to his companion, "Drouse." A barrage of warnings flashed as he took critical damage from bleeding. He gasped for every breath. For surviving with critical health, the system granted him a permanent increase to his spirit stat. The armored figure remarked on his inexperience as he silently pleaded for help. A dark-haired woman questioned how a beginner could have arrived there before them. A heavily tattooed man choked that he could barely even speak through the pain. The dark-haired man snarled through the blood as his eyes flared with blue energy. The dark-haired man screamed at them to stop staring and help him already. Elsewhere, a knight in white armor stood with a determined gaze. From the shadows, a blonde-haired man gave a low, smug chuckle. The injured man was stunned to hear the knight ask a cleric named Sister Ursina for healing. The request was seen as a miracle, but a pink-haired woman simply declined. The knight could not believe what he had just heard. The blonde-haired man confidently noted that he should have expected this. But the knight was left completely bewildered. The blonde-haired boy told Patsran to give him a health potion, insisting he would pay for it. A gloved figure dismissively tapped a test tube of red liquid. The blonde knight explained the potion would hurt because it wasn't divine magic as he applied it to the boy's leg. As the red liquid touched his skin, the boy's foot began to glow. The boy's eye throbbed as a notification confirmed his health was rapidly regenerating. A voice cried out in absolute disbelief. He screamed over and over that everything hurt. He felt like his entire body was about to explode. This agonizing pain finally explained why healing potions were forbidden in combat. He cursed as the agony ripped through his body. The bottle of red liquid overturned and spilled across the floor. Surrounded by glowing crystals, a woman fought desperately for breath. Shaking uncontrollably, the large muscular man fell to his hands and knees. The young man with a glowing blue eye was certain he had been killed. An armored man demanded to know how a mere newbie had gotten there before them. The dark-haired man suddenly understood they saved him to get information. He didn't care about their motive, explaining he was just transported there upon entry. The blond man in armor recalled reading this was a once-in-a-century event. The dark-haired man asked in disbelief if this only happened once a century. The party was a cleric and a mage, seasoned adventurers aiming to go far into the labyrinth. The dark-haired man realized he had experienced something the veterans had not. The blond armored man thanked the tattooed man for his intriguing story. He added that the potion was on him. The tattooed man knew a core rule of the labyrinth: time equals money. The white-robed figure considered it a miracle to find adventurers willing to spend so much time on her. An injured warrior strained to lift a heavy shield with one blooded hand. He thought he should be grateful and happy for having survived. But he hated being pitted. Elsewhere, a party of 5 walked together down a glowing path into the darkness. The red-haired man insisted the barbarian was incompetent and simply lucky to have encountered them. Azina reminded him he was against using the potion, but he simply dismissed the man as another fool. A red-haired woman wearing a golden sun emblem stared forward with solemn resolve. The archer defended the priestess's actions, but the armored man simply called it hypocrisy. The yellow-eyed man explained that Drowse's question was a deliberate tactic, as barbarians hate being indebted. The blond man in ornate armor laughed, calling their words much too kind. The blond-haired man wondered if the barbarians' blood trail was ever going to end. A red-haired man admitted their resilience wasn't just luck but felt sure it would end here. The blond-haired man pointed to a shortcut, earning praise from the white-robed woman.